In the previous video, I discussed some of the nature of the persecution of the Christians in the first 2 centuries of Christianity. Now what I want to do is talk about the reasons that so many of the especially pagan leaders and citizens of the Roman Empire despised the early Christians. And I want to suggest to you that it's because of the countercultural nature of the early church. Now, my source for this is a great book that I highly encourage you to read at some point called The Rise of Christianity, How the Obscure Marginal Jesus Movement Became the Dominant Religious Force in the Western World in a Few Centuries. Now, that's put out by Princeton University Press. So, I owe this list to him. Now, he did not give it in a numerical form here. This is my compilation. And actually, when I say my compilation, it's been put together by others in a similar way. So mine was inspired by others that I don't recall right now. So why was it that the Roman world was so averse to Christians, given that they were very free in their religious beliefs? They weren't so worried about a person's doctrines, or which gods a person worshiped. So they weren't terribly concerned about the religion of their neighbors. But why was it that Christians faced particular scrutiny? Well, number one, they refused to attend bloodthirsty entertainment. What you're going to see is many of these would call into question what we would refer to as their patriotism, or their allegiance to the Roman Empire and to all the things that they assumed made Rome great. So the first was their refusal to attend bloodthirsty entertainment. Of course, the Roman circuses were famous for their bloodbaths. People came to watch gory battles, and they came to watch public executions. The kind of things that the Romans would do, they'd take beasts from around the world and have them fight. And so you'd see a bear versus a gorilla or something crazy like that. They find animals from different parts of the empire and bring them together, and then people could pay money and go see that and watch it happen. These were called spectacles. They were things that were supposed to mesmerize, to capture the eye. And unanimously, early Christian writers wrote against it. So, for instance, the Athenagoras, the same that we've quoted earlier, says, "We do not reckon among the things of greatest interest the contests," who does not reckon among the things of greatest interest the contests of gladiators and wild beasts, especially those which are given by Caesar. But we, deeming that to see a man put to death is as much the same as killing him, have abjured such spectacles." He said it's as bad to watch a man die or see him put to death as it is to kill him himself. How then, when we do not even look on, lest we should contract guilt and pollution, can we put people to death? See, Christians were anti-death. They were pro-life. They did not want to watch gladiators fight to the death, or a man fight a wild beast trying to survive. And Athenagoras says we can't even look upon this kind of violence. Now, he's just one of many who said it's wrong for Christians to go to these games. And so as the empire became more and more Christian, there was less and less allowance and interest in these games, and eventually they were stopped because of their brutality. And that was because the Roman Empire became essentially a Christian empire. But in the first centuries, that was not the case. And Christians were seen as strange in that they wouldn't participate. Now, this isn't an exact counterpart, so don't get me wrong. I'm a college football fan. I attended Auburn University, and every once in a while we have a good college football team. I go to games. I watch the NFL, and that may or may not be your thing. I'm not saying that watching professional sports is the same thing as the ancient gladiatorial contests, because ultimately they don't end in death. But I'm just saying, imagine that here you are, this crazy college football fan. You love your team so much, you love going to the games, you love watching them on TV, and then you meet somebody who says, not only do I not go to those games, but I think it's wrong for people to participate in that violence. Maybe it's because the concussing issue has become so prevalent that you think Christians shouldn't be doing that anymore. People should not pay to see that kind of stuff. We shouldn't be encouraging this. You know what kind of pushback they get in our culture, right? It might be from Christians, but certainly from the culture at large. They're going to say, look, we love this stuff, and we still want it. And so regardless of the consequences for the players. So this is a rough analogy, and I know it doesn't work perfectly, but you can just kind of see a person who would not only stand up and say, I don't watch football, but to say that it's wrong to happen. Our culture is not going to appreciate much because we are a sports-obsessed culture. Muhammad Ali died recently. He's an icon in our culture and often considered by many to be the greatest boxer of all time. Again, people didn't tend to die in the boxing ring. But what if someone stood up and said, we need to stop this? This isn't right for people to watch, much less the athletes to endure. That's the kind of cultural pushback you would get, that you could see. And now ramp that up because the games were much more popular and because they were much more violent. So the Christians were countercultural in that they refused to attend bloodthirsty entertainment. They did not support Caesar's wars of conquest, which made them appear weak. Don't let me overstate this, but I do want to make this statement. The early church was, for all practical purposes, pacifist. What I mean by that is they refused to fight in the army. They refused to fight battles. Now, that is not me saying it's wrong for a Christian to be in the armed forces today. Ultimately, every person will have to make that decision by his or her own conscience. My point here is this. The Roman Empire, which was ultimately, as all empires are, concerned most of all about its own preservation, would use its military in all kinds of ways. And Christians said we can't do that because we're supposed to love our enemies. And you see this time and time again in the Christian literature. Now, it's not that there weren't Christians in the army. It is clear. But the Christian voices you see are against Christians fighting in battle. So, for instance, Justin Martyr said this. You can be convinced that this happened. We who used to kill one another do not make war on our enemies. We refuse to tell lies to deceive our inquisitors. We prefer to die acknowledging Christ. We who were filled with war and mutual slaughter and all wickedness have each and all throughout the earth changed our instruments of war, our swords into plowshares, our spears into farming tools, and cultivate piety, justice, love of humankind, faith, and the hope we have from the Father through the crucified one. So he's evoking biblical imagery there, turning your swords into plowshares. We're peaceful people now. Likewise, Irenaeus says in his book Against Heresies, this will be about 180 A.D. But if the law of liberty, that is the word of God, preached by the apostles who went forth from Jerusalem throughout all the earth, caused such a change in the state of things, that these did form the swords and war lances into plowshares, and changed them into pruning hooks for reaping the grain. That is, into instruments for peaceful purposes, that they are now unaccustomed to fighting. But when smitten, offer also the other cheek. See, he's using the words of Jesus from Matthew 5:39. If your enemy strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. So he says, look, we're known for our peacefulness. And again, he invokes that biblical imagery of turning plowshares, swords into plowshares. One more example, I could give many. Hippolytus, who wrote in the apostolic tradition somewhere around 200 A.D., a military man in authority must not execute men. So if you're a Roman general and you have in your authority to put people to death, you can't do it. If he's ordered, he must not carry it out, nor must he take military oath. If he refuses, in other words, if he refuses to refrain from taking the oath, he shall be rejected. If someone is a military governor or the ruler of a city who wears the purple, that's a sign that they are a Roman subject, a Roman leader, he shall cease or shall be rejected. The catechumen, that's the person studying to be a Christian, or faithful who wants to become a soldier, is to be rejected, for he has despised God. Now, this made them seem to be disloyal And they were not appreciated because the Romans were a bloodthirsty people, and it was expected that you were going to go and fight. So, again, I'm not trying to necessarily draw straight lines to a modern scenario to say that Christians should never fight in wars. That's not my point. My point is to show you why Christians were marginalized and persecuted in the first 2 centuries. And that's because they weren't good warriors, because they tried to show the love of Jesus and refused to fight in Rome's wars. Number 3, they were against abortion and infanticide. In this culture, both were considered acceptable. So women had ways of performing abortions even in ancient times. And also, the more common practice was just infanticide. In other words, a baby's born, and if for some reason there was something about that baby that the mother or father didn't like, they'd simply expose the child, throw it out in the trash heap, and let it die. I'll give you one chilling example. This is a letter that was recovered in Egypt at Oxyrhynchus. It's in papyrus form of a husband who's away writing back to his wife. And this is written somewhere around 1 BC. So right around the 1st century time period. His name is Hilarion. Hilarion, to Alice, his sister, heartiest greetings, and to my dear Berus and Apollinarian. Know that we are still even now in Alexandria. Do not worry when all the others return. If when all the others return, I remain in Alexandria. I beg and beseech of you to take care of the little child, and as soon as we receive wages, I will send them to you. If, good luck to you, you bear offspring. Now notice what he says here. If it's male, let it live. If it's female, expose it. That means throw her outside. Let her die from the elements. I only want a boy, in other words. And he says this nonchalantly. Then he says, you told Aphrodisias, don't forget me. How can I forget you? I beg you, therefore, not to worry. You see, just in the middle of, kind of nonchalantly in a letter, writing back to his wife, he says, oh yeah, and by the way, about that baby, if it's a boy, awesome. But if it's a girl, kill it. And this was a common way of thinking. This is going to lead into the next point we're going to make about the role of women in the Roman world. But here, I just want you to see that there was a very callous attitude towards babies, either the unborn or newly born. The Christians were following what would be seen to be Jewish precedent in that they rejected abortion and exposure. So Josephus, the Jewish historian, says the law moreover enjoins us to bring up all our offspring and forbids women to cause abortion of what is begotten or to destroy it afterward. And if any woman appears to have so done, she will be a murderer of her child. Okay, so this was something forbidden among the Jews. The Christians carried on this practice. So you see, although abortion is not specifically mentioned in the New Testament, in the Didache, an important Christian document written somewhere around 100 AD, speaks of the second commandment of the teaching: don't murder, don't commit adultery, do not corrupt boys, do not fornicate, do not steal, do not practice magic, do not go in for sorcery, do not murder a child by abortion or kill a newborn infant. So this is just a list of commandments. And one of them, or two of them, don't have an abortion, don't kill a newborn infant. Now, this was foreign to the Roman way of thinking. And Christians were known not only for not performing abortions and for not exposing children, but for finding exposed babies and raising them to be Christian. You can read more about these in Athenagoras, but we're going to move on. Number 4, they empowered women by showing their value and dignity in places of learning and service which had previously been exclusively for men. So this is a truth that I think needs to be repeated, especially in our day. When Christianity goes to a new area, the status of women goes up. Now, I know that historically, the church has had a spotty record on its treatment of women, but I want you to see that that has been the case for all of human history. But when Christianity shows up, the plight of women gets better. We'll talk more about that in our next video.